Well, welcome back to the Tuxes Tomahawks podcast. I have an amazing two guests today, and for once, we don't get to talk about serious politics and stuff. I just love my intro video. It's ridiculous. Shout out to the guy who
Yeah,
made that
before
video.
you even introduce us, can I tell you that is the best open I've ever seen in my life?
It's so funny.
Yeah, I don't have one for my own podcast. It's horrible, and I was in broadcast news for 27 years, and I'm embarrassed by it. And we're actually in the process of creating one, but where that video was found, I have no idea, or created, I have no idea, but it's amazing.
Yeah, so the guy who made it for me, I'm like, hey, so basically, my podcast is a lot on military corruption and government exposure and things like that. I started with the Dark Saber podcast, which is specifically about reforming our federal service academies, and it kind of branched into the second podcast because I didn't just want to exclusively interview military people all the time. So this is kind of like my Joe Rogan podcast where I kind of interview everybody. But the last year
Mhm.
with politics, and I'm sure if you've probably done some background research on me, like it's been insane for the last year. So what I really am excited about bringing you to Joel and Karmela Waldman on this podcast is I don't have to talk about what I've been talking about for the last year. I can bring it back to something different, talking about people who are making a real difference in their country and all their experiences. So I want to welcome you both to the show. I'm so excited to talk to you guys today. And if you guys wouldn't mind introducing yourselves and tell us who you are, where you're from, and what you've been doing to make those differences.
Oh, Carm, you go first. Ladies first.
Okay,
And since
okay.
she's 85, this could take a while, but go ahead.
No, do you want a very abridged one or do you want just a plain abridged? Anyway,
Carmela,
I
I
will
want to
do
know
it
everything
abridged.
about you. I want to know
I will,
everything about you.
it will be very difficult to condense the 85 years
This is what you need to
into
know
a few
about her.
minutes.
I have
But
three children, and every curse word they have learned is from Grandma
it's
Carm.
not
Go
true.
ahead.
They
It
learned
is
a few
true.
from you
It
too.
is.
Anyway, my name is Karmela Waldman. I was born in 1939. You do the math. And I live right now, I am living in Miami. And I was born in a town, very small town on the border between Hungary and Yugoslavia, on the Yugoslav side of the border just before the Second World War started. So I was born at the wrong time at the wrong place, actually. And then, being of Jewish religion, I had some war experiences that I wouldn't describe as pleasant. But since then, my life has been very okay.
That's amazing, Carmela, that you are a Holocaust survivor from World War II, and we're losing our greatest generation. Ironically, my grandmother was born in 1924. She just passed away 2 weeks ago at the age of 100. Grew
Wow.
up, died in the same house that she was born in Edgewater, New Jersey. That woman refused to go to a nursing home. She's like, I'm dying in this house. You're never taking me out. I don't care. And she was fine until literally like 3 days before she passed away. And hearing
Wow.
her stories about the war, it was very different because she had, an American perspective on it. But this is a true honor to actually interview somebody from the greatest generation. And actually, this year, ironically, I'm a paratrooper in the Army, and I am actually going out to jump into the Normandy D-Day invasion reenactment this year. And I am so excited about that I get to travel to France to jump into Normandy and do the reenactment. So it is an honor to interview you today, Carmela, and thank you so much for telling your story and telling the younger generations now about what your experience was like growing up in that horrible environment in World War II.
Adam, two small, very minor points. One of the minor points is that the man in the New York Yankee hat
Yeah. Two minor
is,
points and then 10,000 more. Go ahead.
and his name is Joel, and he's my pride and joy. And as he points out very frequently, without him I would be nothing. But also I have to tell you, I had the privilege of visiting Normandy, the beaches, and you will be amazed. How they did it is beyond belief. You know how they succeeded in winning that part of the war was hard to believe.
And Carm, by the way, when you're being interviewed by a an American hero, which is what I
I
consider
will
admirable,
say
you're
thank you
supposed
for
to
your service.
thank you
That's
for your service. We honestly we appreciate on our podcast. Surviving the Survivor, we dub ourselves as having the best guests in all of true crime. I'm kind of the Larry King of true crime. I do a live show every single night of the week on the biggest cases in the United States. And we have, FBI agents, tons of law enforcement, retired detectives. So, you guys put your lives on the line, especially the military. So thank you for that.
No, I appreciate that. I've been doing this for like over 12 years now. I went to the Air Force Academy, became a Marine. Then we all got out during the Obama administration. Then I came back enlisted into the Army National Guard with 19 Special Forces Group. I was a parachute rigger over there. And now I moved over back to the officer side with civil affairs. So we go overseas. We do foreign influencing campaigns. So like Ukraine, for example, it's completely been destroyed, and they need to do their infrastructure rebuild. And I'm a civilian expert in oil and gas and wastewater treatment. So we'll be going and doing these types of operations in Indo-PACOM and things like that. But no,
are you active military?
I'm reserve right now. Yeah. So
reserve.
I'm
Okay.
Actively serving in the reserve. So yeah, it's one of those things where I feel a responsibility to stay in because I grew up in the global war on terror. I joined when I was 18 in 2006. I saw the towers collapse. I lost family in New York City. That's where I'm from. So it's interesting now that I've been in for so long that the younger kids coming up behind me were born after 9/11, and they have no idea what we're doing overseas or why we're doing it. And like I said before we started this podcast, I'm actually heavily involved in exposing corruption and crime in the military. That's why I'm hated by the Department of Defense. Like Lloyd Austin, Joe Biden administration, they absolutely can't stand me. So we'll have to connect on your podcast because if you want to talk about some true crime in the military and how like I've had vans parked outside my farm surveying me for years over federal court cases and stuff, that's something we're definitely going to have to connect on. So,
however, I just in the last few weeks or maybe even days, I saw headlines saying that recruitment in the army since the new administration came in, that the recruitment in the army went up, and
Yes, it did.
the whole atmosphere has improved.
It has, and I've served under George Bush, Barack Obama, Trump 1, Biden 1, and now Trump 2. And I will tell you, it's a completely different environment than I've ever seen since I was a kid. And we're actually finally recruiting Americans that want to fight for this country's constitution again. And we're not in, I hate to say this, but like the military is exclusive on purpose. We don't want everybody. We want the best of the best. And it's interesting to see that shift back to a meritocracy versus mediocrity. And I will tell you from my experiences on deployment in the Middle East, I've been to Israel, I've been to Syria, I've been to Jordan, I've been to a whole bunch of other countries in the Middle East. And there's a problem. There are people overseas now that want to kill Americans and all of these horrible things that we see on the protests and everything here. And unless you've been overseas, unless you've spent time, you can't possibly comprehend what that environment is like. And it's dangerous. And we need the best Americans to be able to defend the freedoms of the world to do those things. So, we want to prevent another Holocaust.
By the way, not only is your cold open incredible, but you have a great name too. Where's Tuxes? Sorry, Carm. Where's Tuxes and Tomahawks come from?
So so this is a funny story behind that. Is I renamed the podcast. It used to be named the Embark Podcast when I first started 8 years ago, and then when I started getting heavily involved into politics, I literally had to fake it till I made it. And next thing I know, I'm at Donald Trump's house, and I have to wear a tuxedo because normally I'm a cowboy boots and jeans type of guy. And Tomahawks, ironically, which is, if you look, I can't see it here, but if you look on this side of the screen, there's a Tomahawks cross over there. Yeah. That is actually the symbols of civil affairs in the United States Army Special Operations Command Division. So we use Tomahawks because that's what Lewis and Clark did to pave the way with the Indian tribes across America and expand America through influence. So it's kind of an homage to the initial frontiersmen and civil influencing campaigns. So we always joke that, and I'm sure you've seen the classic movie True Lies with Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he shows up, we call them the embassy parties. So the way we do psychological operations is we show up in tuxes, but we always have our tomahawks with us. So, we're ready to do, peace through political negotiation, but we're not afraid to shoot you, basically. So
I have a Carm. How is it possible that I'm 55 years old and as shallow and sort of uneducated as I am? Then you got Adam, who's probably half my age, well, a little bit less than half my age. By the way, we're all from New Jersey, but you've got, look at this. This guy is a principled. I mean, he saw the war on terror. I saw the world. I worked at Three World Financial on 9/11, and back then there were I for some reason
Not in finance, in media.
yeah, I was a reporter, but I had it for whatever weird. I was living in Hoboken too, next to
Good old
your
Hoboken. Love that place.
yeah, and so I was I was on my way into work, and for some reason, I don't know why. This is like pre cell phone. I think there were cell phones, but not the cameras. But anyway, I had two of those like disposable Kodak cameras. So somewhere I have unreal photos, one tower up, one tower down. But that's neither here nor there. Carm, my question to you is, how am I such a vapid, sort of uneducated, uninterested human being? And then you've got Adam here, Adam Dorito, same state. He goes, he sees the towers collapse, and he joins the military. I'm way too cowardly to do that. And now he's outspoken about corruption in the military. How can two totally different sons be born in the great state of New Jersey, Carm? And are you embarrassed? And are you embarrassed? And are you embarrassed that I am your son?
I need to
Would
call
you
my
prefer
wife
Adam?
podcast now.
You just answered your own question. You said you are too afraid. You just answered. And if I am embarrassed that you're my son, no, I think you are a very good human being, and it manifests itself in a different variation. And if you really scratch the surface, I think you see things very much as Adam sees them.
Yeah,
but maybe your response, you can fight the fight in different venues in different ways.
Adam, I don't want to sound like a middle-aged guy, but I want to say you're a very impressive young. How old are you?
I'm 37.
37. Okay. You look
no,
great.
But like, I think you and I have taken different perspectives on this over the years. So I mean, you had your mother growing up, surviving the war, surviving one of the worst human atrocities known to man in our modern generation. And then she raises a son like you. And, like I said, we took different avenues in life, but we have had similar influences. So, like, I joined the military and went to go fight the political wars for all these geriatric boomers that are trying to tell me that, there's totally WMDs in Iraq. And then they kill a bunch of my friends. And then, there's totally, these guys who caused the towers to fall in Afghanistan. And then we go over there and realize, no, it's just an opium, scheme that caused a massive crisis in the United States, even though bin Laden and all the rest of them are from Saudi Arabia. And I'm sure you, as a video producer working in the news networks, you've been exposed to this for decades and seeing, all the corruption and everything in the background that was going on. So I think this is a really unique opportunity to kind of talk about our life experiences, coming up from the way your mother raised you and what you've seen on basically the political, news cycle. So tell me more about you, Joel, and how you got involved in news media and growing up in New Jersey and how that led you to where you started the Surviving the Survivor podcast.
Yeah, well, thank you. And thanks for having us here. And I'm a little loopy. If you ever heard of the radio, this is a generational thing, and just saying radio, by the way, is generational, but that there's a show, Coast to Coast AM. Have you ever heard of that? It's
yes, I have. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was a guest on it last night, and therefore I did since the clocks just moved ahead when you're watching or listening to this. So I actually was a guest from the 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. hour, because that's my value. And because the clocks bounce forward, they pushed me to 4 to 6. So long story short, I didn't sleep last night and I'm loopy. So I apologize in advance. But so I started off, everything I've done in my life is an absolute accident and mistake. Like you, I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up in a town called Highland Park, which is right. You can throw a rock and hit Rutgers University. Weird stuff is in our water because, we had just brilliant kids. I think it's because a lot of my friends' parents were like professors at Rutgers. So,
but it makes great pizza and bagels, and people don't underestimate that. You can only get the quality food in New Jersey, and it doesn't exist 100%. Anywhere else.
Yeah, well, you're in Colorado. You're definitely, and I'm in Florida. Even in Florida, which is basically New York, you can't get anything remotely close to. By the way, Jersey's better too. Yeah, and Jersey's better than New York. But yeah, so everything I did was a mistake. Everyone I knew was, going down kind of a professional route, either a lawyer, a doctor, or something we have the youngest editor ever at GQ, a guy named David Camp, graduated from my high school. I'm going to name drop now. The lead from Sex and the City, Stanford, the gay guy, is from my town. He's also in White Collar. He's a little bit older, went to high school with my sister. He passed from pancreatic cancer. It's a very weird. And then we had great athletes. My friend, he also died. This is crazy. But Tyrone Harrison, he was a fullback at The Ohio State. There's a guy named Bruce Presley, Bruce Presley is still the all-time rushing leader in New Jersey, and he is from my town and played at Rutgers. But I digress. So I'll make it super quick. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I actually got a master's in education. I taught inner city kids in Washington Heights, New York, and it was interesting, but I could never do it for a living. It was so hard. It was like single moms who were 16 with their, 5-year-old kid. I was like a kindergarten cop. And the only reason I did it is my dad had a friend in Jersey who was making millions on the daycare business, and I like kids, and after that job, I sort of hated them. But I still kind of like them. And anyway, I heard about this thing called the NBC Page program. I applied. It was very kind of selective program where you start off giving like tours of NBC. And then the year I was there, they started this new thing, and I was assigned 2 of 80. There were 80 pages. 2 of us were assigned, one to the CEO, one to the executive vice president. I was asked to help the executive vice president, and that's when he was literally creating MSNBC. So Bill Gates would be in the office periodically, and he would fly out to Seattle. And on a trip to Seattle, I applied to MSNBC, and I dropped his name, Tom Rogers, who was the executive vice president of NBC, who, by the way, was your age at the time, and I thought he was like 50.
That's crazy.
But he was like a media power broker. And that was it. I went to MSNBC, which at one point was actually Objective News. And then then I went to the New York Stock Exchange because someone asked me, and I was covering U.S. equities from there. And then I ended up doing like the local news circuit. I ended up back at Fox 5 with Ernie Anastas, and I was an on-camera investigative reporter. And then I was shipped down by Roger Ailes to Fox News in Washington, D.C., where I covered politics, and I covered I was on a breaking news team that I loved, but I absolutely hated covering politics, and I hated DC.
I hate it now.
Yeah, and I hated a lot of people in that city, if I could say that.
Me too.
Yeah,
I have to deal with it now, and it's a cesspool of like just failed policy, and I just call them losers at this point.
Yeah.
Like, you're a bunch of losers. You're losers. I mean, it's just what I love about Trump is like I grew up with Trump just like you did, like New York, like everyone knew who he was. Nobody really, I mean, we take him seriously, but he's just like the guy. And when he started running for president in 2016, I like couldn't take it seriously. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, he's actually, and I'm like, just it's like throwing a grenade into the room. It's like, let's just see what happens. This could be fun. And then he actually wins, and you're like, you got to be kidding me. And that's when I started getting heavily involved into political advocacy work, because I'm like, oh, I mean, I don't agree with everything the guy does, but this guy is the only person who like you can't buy him off because he has too much money. You know what I mean? It's like that SNL skit he did once. He's like, "What's the difference between Donald Trump and a wet raccoon? A wet raccoon doesn't have $7 billion in the bank." And I'm like, he's not wrong. And just watching him now just completely destroy the establishment of what politics that we have known our entire lives in DC. Is it going to work? I don't know. But you know what?
In 1 month, you forgot to add. In 1 month.
In 1 month. And for me, it's and not to sidetrack your story here, but for me, and I'm sure whatever side of the aisle you sit on, Democrat or Republican, I don't really care. What I enjoy seeing is that after sending my generation to war for 20 years, there's somebody who's actually willing to completely dismantle everything that killed all my friends, whether we are successful in doing that or not, because I don't want to send my future kids to deal with conflicts in third world countries like I've had to deal with for 20 years. And I'm sure you've seen similar things with your experiences in interviewing politics, and especially coming from New York and having to go to DC. What was that transition like, working in media in New York and then having to go work in media in DC? That had to have been like a drastic change.
Yeah. By the way, let me name drop one more name that no one has ever heard of. Mark Polymeropoulos is a nice Jewish kid from my town. His dad was Greek. Is Greek. He's still around. Anyway, Mark should be a guest on your show.
Shoot 'em my way.
He retired as a CIA officer. He was at the Baghdad airport before the war in Iraq. He was hiding out in caves looking for bin
Interesting.
Laden. Yeah, they taught him Arabic.
Definitely need to talk to him.
Yeah, cool dude. He's got a book out, Clarity in Crisis, and I think he was in charge of 3,000 officers when he was no joke.
Hmm.
And all around great guy. And he said gives me the chills because he's I really do have a respect because I'm way too cowardly. I'm way too afraid of dying. I think, which means I'll probably get hit by a truck when I walk out of the studio. But
Or or sleep on a banana peel.
or slip on a banana. There's always that too. By the way, Adam, you don't,
Love your mom.
you're, well, actually, I'm sure, think about death. I never thought about, there's two things I never thought about in life. I couldn't care less about money because all I wanted to do is become a national correspondent. I just didn't care. I live in Miami now where the only thing that you see is money. I'm
Oh, yeah.
literally surrounded by the richest people in the entire world. I literally live probably a quarter mile from, and I'm separated by water, but I live like a quarter mile from Jeff Bezos, Tom
Mhm.
Brady.
Yep.
The amount of money here is insane, but I never cared about money. And the only thing I wanted to do was become a national correspondent. The other thing, though, that I never even thought about was mortality, death,
Hmm.
dying.
Yeah.
But you've seen it, so I'm sure you have a much different attitude. But now that I'm 55, but I literally feel I mean, I'm dysfunctional, but I feel like I'm 17 or 18. I mean, I'm wearing a Yankees hat with a rose on it right now. So I'm not the most serious like
Listen,
55-year-old.
Joel,
Yeah.
soon your children will catch up with you in age.
Yeah, soon. I have little kids, but you don't have to lean in, Carm. We can hear you. You don't have to lean into your laptop. But my point is, you probably have a much different relationship with death, sadly. Which I mean, in a good way, in a bad way, I guess, because of your
Yeah. I mean,
experiences. But yeah,
seeing it from the 9/11 perspective, that was an eye opener. And ironically, growing up in New Jersey, I was an EMT and a firefighter, so I actually got exposed to a lot of death at a young age, like starting when I was 16 years old. Car accidents, because all those crazy drunk kids, ripping around on Clinton Road up there.
yeah.
But yeah, but even then, like even when I joined the military, like I work in intelligence now. That's my main thing. And like the weird part about intelligence is that you see everything. Everyone's like, oh, the frontline guys, or and yes, that exists, but you don't see what's behind that wall. You don't see what I see from the drones or the satellite photos, and the militia groups fighting. And I'm
Mm.
sure Carmela could speak to that too. I mean, her experience is probably with death and the Holocaust as well, and like that must have been an absolutely eye-opening experience compared to what I have seen. So I think when it comes to mortality, we all have a different perspective on it, but we're all here for a reason. God put us on this earth for however many years, and time is not up to us. I think that's the one thing I've come to understand about
Mm.
death is that time is not up to us. However long we're here is however long we're supposed to be here, right? And the fact that your mother is still around at 85 years old, still telling her story, is a testament to what's important for the next generation and what you've seen in your life as well. Even seeing the towers go down and, in your entire political career as a correspondent, and even in my experience in the military, we all bring these experiences together on these shows and we discuss these things because it's important for people who haven't had those experiences to maybe learn from our mistakes from the past.
Yeah. But I can't get over
But
how.
Adam, it's a little bit. It always bothered me that it's very, very maybe impossible, even very difficult to transmit experience.
Hmm.
You want to tell them what happened and what the dangers were and what to look for and what to prevent and what to understand, and yet people have almost have to experience it themselves. So that's why I think there is a little bit of a gap between the generations. Like you say, you meet young people who were born after 9/11. They cannot understand what the atmosphere in the country
No,
was
they can't.
at that moment, you
Yeah,
know.
well, it was actually united back then. I mean, after 9/11.
Exactly, that was my point. I remember people were, we had to go to Chicago. My daughter was living there, and we were standing there, and I remember going and saying, "Thank you for your service at the airport. Thank you for your service." You know, first we couldn't even go by plane, we had to drive.
Yep.
So it's very hard to describe the feeling in the immediate instant reaction and then the protracted longer term reaction to. In other words, you cannot transmit. Every generation has to almost learn it from scratch.
I actually agree with that 100%. And it's something I've learned over the years from spending time in third world countries as well, is that you can talk about it, and podcasts like this, telling your story are super important to that. But until you're there and you see it and you see what's actually going on in the world, people can't rationally comprehend it. Like I've been to Nepal, I've been to India, I've been to Peru, I've been all over the Middle East, even in like, Western Europe. It's very different than America. And for Americans to sit there and say, I hate this country. We're doing everything wrong. I sat there and went, I will buy you a plane ticket to Syria and you can get on the ground and you can tell me about how many freedoms you don't have. Let me take you to the West Bank. Let me show you how, all these kids are getting blown up with landmines, getting airstrikes every day. And this happens on a daily basis in Israel and in those areas. And nobody talks about it, right? What's going on in Gaza. We left country right before that whole October 7th thing kicked off, but we saw it building up. We saw it coming. We knew what was going to happen. But Americans, honestly, until 9/11, and even that small spectrum of time, Americans had no idea what war and what totality and what mortality it was like. And I will agree with both of you on that, is that the only time I've ever seen this country universally united was on September 12th, right? Everyone's driving around with their headlights on. There's American flags everywhere. And you just don't see that anymore. And we've lost the perspective of what it means to be an American and what it means to survive the Holocaust and tell that story to make sure that these things don't happen again. And unless you've experienced those in real time, or like you, Joel, where you've reported on it and you've talked about it to thousands and tens of thousands of Americans, I just wish people would take the time to stop talking and start listening more and learn from our experiences.
Good point. Good point. I always tell everybody the best interviewer and podcast hosts, like Adam, are good listeners. So
I try my best. And that's why, like, I go into these interviews blind. I don't have any preset questions. I want to hear your stories and I want to know what your experiences were like, because that's what people want to hear and that's what people want to listen to, is like these unique stories, not these canned responses, not these 30-second clips. They want to hear these long form podcasts where, because there's going to be a time where none of us are on this earth, but they can go back and listen to these things and learn from our mistakes. Like you said, you had no idea. Either did I. I decided to join the Air Force Academy and join the military in a time of war. Like that was a good idea. And here I am still reaping the benefits of it, seeing the absolute chaos that's ensuing around the world at this point. So, Karmela,
no, I was going to say, I'm sorry, Adam. I was going to say that's exactly why I wrote a book about my mom, which is the same title as a podcast, Surviving the Survivor. Obviously, tongue in cheek, as I'm trying to survive my mother, who can be tough on me. But it's it's like 20% her Holocaust story, which is actually fascinating. She was saved by 2 non-Jews, including a nun, which we can get into. But it's also her life perspective, which you just can't have. I mean, my mom was born in a part of former Yugoslavia that there was no cars when she was born, just horse and buggy. And now she lives in Miami Beach, where there's AI. So the amount of stuff, that she's seen in her lifetime's crazy. And so I wrote a book. And the book, I bill it as the first laugh out loud Holocaust story, because it's got a lot of humor. Karm believes in everyone just gasped. Karm believes in using humor to get through tough times. So it's really it's our recorded conversations, but it just, what you just said resonated, because you said, sorry, Mom, after people are long gone, there will be these podcasts and record. And my mother and I have done many podcasts, but I've got the book and I feel like I've recorded that piece of history. I tell everyone she's a living, breathing, walking piece of history. So there's not a lot of things that like I am proud of, but I'm proud that I wrote that book.
No, and I think it's super important, Joel, because ironically, before my grandmother passed away, I podcast interviewed her twice. So I have these video and audio recordings of my grandmother telling, growing up in the Great Depression, all the way through World War II, Vietnam, Korea, the launching of man onto the moon, like JFK assassinations. Like, it was crazy hearing that living history. So why don't you both describe, like, how did you decide to write the book, and how did you tell her story, and how are we going to be able to relive this history so that other people listening to this podcast can go back and read Surviving the Survivor? Like, what is this story about? Tell me all the details. I'm like fascinated by this.
Well, thanks for asking. I mean, in a nutshell, it is, again, it's like 20% my mom's story. It tells you my mom's entire story, and it's sort of a full circle book because it ends with, I had kids late. I did everything in life late, but I had kids well into my 40s. So I have young kids now. I married young, so I'm not that dumb. And I ended up taking them with my mom at the end of the book back to Serbia, which is where she's from. And, I heard about it my whole life, and I just had this, I've traveled a lot, but I just had this sort of image in my mind of like this little Eastern European, whatever. It was just this thing that was kind of embedded in my head. And as an American from New Jersey, I have to say it was like a condescending look at a little village somewhere in Eastern Europe. When I went there, it was beautiful. It was amazing. It was a really cool little place. But how did I write the book? I knew bits and pieces of my mom's story. And growing up, we had this picture of this nun. Her name was Matilda Gorchonich in our house in New Jersey. And I'm like, yeah, that's, whatever you're raised with is normal. So I thought it was normal for a Jewish kid in Jersey to have a nun hanging on the living room wall. But, and then I found out later in life that my mom.
Respect that. That's fine.
So later in life, I found out that the kind of the story about that. My mom, or her, even donated to the church late into her life. And, that was a different time. Like you were talking about the Greatest Generation. And there was a non-Jewish doctor who basically brings my mother over to a Catholic school for boys where my mom was hidden, and learned all her Hail Marys and all her prayers. And so the book recounts that, but the subtitle is a long one, but it's basically a brutally honest conversation about life. And during the process, my dad was actually getting very sick. So I got a chance to watch my mom, who was married to him for 63 years, sort of survive in real time during the writing of this book. But, I knew that I had a lot of family. Like I had Uncle Alan and Uncle Joe, who they all escaped. They were my grandfather's brothers. My grandfather got out of Europe before World War II, and he was actually a tobacco picker for a while in Cuba. Like the stories are wild. And lo and behold, in 1999, you're not going to love this as a conservative. And trust me, I am not a fan of this guy at all, but it's where the paycheck was. But I worked for Michael Moore for a summer, and he's a whole other story. I won his ping pong tournament.
That must have been interesting for Michael Moore.
Yeah, he's a pain in the ass. I can't stand him. He is a total hypocrite. Like he's what we call a limousine liberal. But anyway, I won his ping pong tournament, and
there you go.
I kicked Sarah Silverman's boyfriend's ass at the time, and he gave me like a 4-foot trophy, and then he asked for it back, and I was like, "What? Like who asked for the trophy back?" But anyway, Michael Moore encouraged me. So like in '99, I went and interviewed a lot of my family, and then basically I did it on camera. I hired someone. I did it all, and then did nothing with it because I was just so busy always. And then fast forward to this podcast that I pitched with my mom. We started off, we were not a true crime podcast. And we interviewed Carol Baskin at the height of Tiger King. I just was getting random guests.
You interviewed Carol? She's still alive?
Yeah. And my mom is the only one out of the 400 almost million Americans that never heard of Tiger King. So she was calling it Lion King. And
yes.
So Carol Baskin, she said something. It's weird, and it stuck in my ear. She said, "Your mother is like my beloved tigers. She is an endangered species." And after she said that, I was like, I got to write a book. And I did, and it's hard to believe that I did it, but it kind of
So
all
Carol
came
Baskin
together.
inspired you to write a book about your mom. I just want to make sure we standpoint that.
Well,
You know,
yes, yeah.
there is serendipity in life, and strange things happen unrelated. You know, not completely in the same vein, but they lead one to the other. But I think that Joel should mention that what happened is that during the height of the COVID, Joel and his family, his three children and his wife, they decided to move to Miami,
Hmm.
and Joel was at loose end. Well, you can tell the story.
No, you tell the story, Carm.
Anyway, Joel was like he just started. He quit work because required a lot of travel, and his children were little, and he wanted to be. So he quit and started his own little business of consulting, and it was beginning to pick up. And then COVID started.
Hmm.
So he moved to Miami, and like everybody else, you know, he was climbing the walls a little. He didn't have enough to do, and so forth.
Yeah.
So he said, you know what? I'm going to start a podcast. And then out of the blue, my husband was already an invalid, and I was taking care of him. And,
By the way,
and
that's you get canceled for that. That's not really a PC term. My dad was had to eventually be. My dad was the fastest walker I'd ever seen. Walked everywhere, and then he got this neuropathy where he couldn't walk and was in a wheelchair. But you can't
Yeah.
call people invalids, Carmen. You get canceled.
I think
You don't
maybe
get canceled on my show,
again
Jojo.
now the last month you can.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
not,
Yeah,
maybe not.
it's the end
But
of
in any case,
wokeness.
I use inappropriate terms. So Joel looked at me and he said, "You would be a good partner for a podcast."
I think you are. I think you're great.
And because I have a master's degree in social work and
Hmm.
some additional courses, and my husband was an MD. He was a psychiatrist, and I worked in this field for almost 37 years. And basically, you interview people. You know,
Yeah.
you ask questions to figure out what is going on, and so he figured that I would be good at this. And besides, one of his friends accused us of like just like putting on shtick, you know, like pretending like we are like an act of two clowns or something. But for us, it's completely natural.
It's pretty accurate though. But
Just
no,
two
it's not.
clowns talking about the Holocaust
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
corrupt news media. Yeah, absolutely. I
We're
mean,
at
that's pretty
no,
much what we have today
we
anyway.
yeah,
Everyone's a Nazi and everything's
yeah,
corrupt.
we were accused of kind of like hamming it up, but the reality is we're actually a lot
Really,
worse.
I
A lot worse when the cameras are off. That's when it gets really dysfunctional, and people should be
Well, you're
nervous.
from New
but
Jersey, so
but
that makes
Yeah,
sense. People call me dysfunctional all the time too.
yeah,
So I mean, when
yeah,
I started throwing flashbangs into rooms, basically in Congress, they were just like, "Who the hell is this guy from New Jersey who went to the Air Force Academy, lives in Colorado?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's right. Welcome to the show."
yeah,
It's kind of funny because I was so hated when I went to the Air Force Academy just because having that East Coast attitude. When I was
mm,
18 years old. And it's
yeah,
just it's not well liked past Pennsylvania. You know
yeah,
what I mean? And it's also why everybody probably hates Trump because he just has the same exact mentality. He just goes in there and goes, I
yeah.
don't care. I'm gonna
It
do
ends
this.
in Butler, Pennsylvania, where they tried to take him out.
Yeah,
You know.
hilarious.
Yeah.
It's that. Oh, that
I
whole. I could talk
don't
about that
know if
forever.
you had a
Yeah.
chance. This reminds me. I don't know if you ever had a chance. There was a cartoon that you could even get it in a size to hang it on your wall. That New Yorker and people from New
Hmm.
Jersey, the way we perceive the United States is we have this enormous New York, New Jersey,
Yep.
and then the rest of the country is a little
About
shrunk,
this
little
big.
not. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
My okay.
And
So ironically, my parents had that. I know exactly what you're talking about. They had that picture framed. In our house. It had New York and New Jersey, and then like the rest of the country was like the size of the top of the Empire State Building. And
exactly,
it's
exactly.
true. It's just I've been all around the world. I've been to so many different cities and countries, and I sit there and go, there's just no place like New York. I don't care what anyone says. We have the best food. We have the best culture. We run pretty much the world economics, out of everything out of there. And I don't care what you say. It's just, you're wrong, we're right, and get over it.
How do you like Colorado, by the way?
It's you know what, the taxes are a little bit lower now. They used to be way lower, but then we started getting a bunch of people from California moving in here and changing all the policies. But I went out, built my own house on 12 acres of land, and I don't have any neighbors now, and I live on a farm with chickens and hopefully cows
Wow.
here soon, and it's great. You know what I
Oh,
mean? But
cool.
I fly back a couple times a year. I go visit my mom, and I was seeing my grandma till she passed away. I still have family out there and friends. But the second I land in Newark and I get in a rental car, the middle fingers come out, my accent comes out, and I'm starting to like throw rocks at people. Oh, you got to cut across 8 lanes of traffic. All right, that's it. I'm getting out of this car. And then I come back to Colorado. I'm like, oh God, I'm so glad I don't live there anymore. I'd probably be in jail. You know?
I must say, I never feel that. My daughter still lives in New Jersey,
Mhm.
and when I go,
Do you create your own eggs via chickens on your farm?
I do. I have not bought eggs in 7 years.
That's
They're
amazing.
amazing. It's completely different. I even harvest my own chickens. I butcher them myself a couple times a year. It's amazing, completely different. And the funny thing is, I started micro. I call it mini farming or micro farming because it's not like I have like a quarter acre I farm on out of the 12
Mhm,
acres I have. I built my because I'm an
mhm.
engineer by trade now, so I went out there and building automatic watering systems and everything else. But so it's actually way harder to farm and grow things in Colorado than it is New Jersey. I took that for granted. In New Jersey, you could stick anything in the ground, it'll grow. You'll get
Yeah,
tomatoes. Out here,
yeah.
it's like you got to like measure the soil and, because it's a lot hot, drier, desert type climate, plateau type area. So, but yeah, I started that project a year before COVID came around because I was bored and I like building things. So I started building this like mini farm structure and building a chicken coop. And then COVID hit, and I'm like, well, that was perfect timing because I don't even have to go to the grocery store. I can live off chicken for a while, and grow my own vegetables and food. And then I just got better at it. You know what I mean? I
Mhm.
started growing all these other things. So yeah, that's one thing I encourage a lot of young Americans to. And I see it now in the younger culture is like kind of getting back to American basics. And I talked to my grandmother about this a lot before she passed away, like your generation, where what was it like during the Great Depression? You know what I mean? How did you guys source food and all this other stuff? And she told me about this guy. I think his name is Bob Newman, if I remember Bob Newman. And what he did in the 80s, 1987, I found this book on Amazon buried deep into the archives. It's called The New Victory Garden. And what he did is he took all the World War II pamphlets that the U.S. Department of Agriculture was mailing out to all citizens around the country about growing vegetables in any place you could grow them because everything was being sent overseas for the war effort, and he modernized them for the 80s, and he basically was teaching Americans how to be self-sufficient again. So I found this book called The New Victory Garden, and it's kind of hard to find now, but I based everything off of that book of how I was structuring my house living out here. And it's something I see now in the younger generations as they want to get back into growing their own vegetables and being a little bit more self-sustainable versus living in these food deserts in the cities and relying
Mhm,
on the government for everything. And it's really good to
mhm.
see. At least we're starting to turn back that way, especially after COVID. But that must have been a very fascinating experience for you, Carmela, as well, growing up in the war and just trying to find food and trying to survive because that was a real threat. And I saw it overseas even now in third world countries now in Nepal and India and the Middle East and stuff. Is people just trying to survive? And like I said, it just
I'll,
goes off your book, Surviving the Survivor, right?
I'll tell
It's
I'll tell
just
you a disturbing story right on the heels of that. By the way, Carm, I'm very glad I gave up my chicken coop. It was just too much work.
oh,
I
don't
could,
be funny.
but no, during the siege of Budapest, Carmela was in Budapest, Hungary, and bombs were raining down, and there was a short supply of food. Speaking of food, and horses were collateral damage, like military horses, and they would die in
Not
the street.
military,
Oh,
not
they weren't
military.
military. Oh, they were the horse and
Every,
buggies.
no, 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 no. Transportation was done in 1944 in Budapest, was done in horse buggies with the
Yeah,
horses.
yeah.
But
So the
the Nazis were in the city and the Allies were attacking, and you can Google it. You can do the siege of Budapest during World War II, and you can see it lasted 50 days, and there was no food. And my mother, who was a little delicate, spoiled lady, uh, would take a big kitchen knife and cut out a piece of these horses that were hit by shrapnel or artillery or even bombardment, and
Right.
they were because it was still snow on the ground. They were like refrigerated. You know,
Yeah. Hmm.
they weren't completely um, rotting away, so you could eat it. So we ate it. We
Yeah.
ate it. I don't know how many times. I would be lying. My mother is, of course, not here anymore. And but can I just tell you one more very interesting little
Please do.
tidbit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, uh, During a moment there, you could take a trip from Israel into Jordan, and there is the one of the miracles or what. Uh, in Jordan, there is a very interesting place. And so the tourists would go there. We would cross over on a bridge, the little Jordan River, which people imagine the size of Mississippi, but it's
It's like
like a
15
little,
feet wide.
it's a creek.
Yeah.
And we would cross over to Jordan. And I was standing in line for the passports, and some Americans were standing next to me, and they said they just came from the Damascus.
Hmm.
This was, I would say, 20 years ago, 25 years ago.
Yeah, you can't do that anymore.
And I said to them, okay, describe what was Damascus like. And they said, you know what Damascus was like? Like Amman, the capital of Jordan,
Yep, I've been there.
is like perfect, the most developed city, the most sophisticated city in the world compared to Damascus. Damascus was even then, I don't know if you ever went to Damascus. I never went.
Yeah, we weren't allowed to go to Damascus. We'd get shot by the Russians up there. But I was
Mm.
actually in Amman. I was stationed in Amman at the Joint Special Tactics base out there. Spent a lot of time on the Jordan River, actually, where this. I don't know if you've been to the archaeological site where Christ was baptized. So that's actually only available on the Jordan side, and you can't go there if you're in Israel, because if you're in a Westerner and you have a passport stamp from Israel, you're banned from any country in the Middle East. So we were on the Middle Eastern side. We weren't allowed to cross into Israel because if we had an Israeli passport stamp on it, we weren't allowed to go back to our military bases because that's
Wow.
how
Yeah, but
ridiculous it is out there.
this was during the Oslo peace,
The Oslo
which
Peace Accords. Hmm.
of course fell apart.
Yep.
But in any case, it was interesting that indirectly all these places where you were, I happened to be there. So the miracle, the seven wonders of the world. This is called
Petra.
Petra.
Yep. Petra. I've been
Petra.
there.
Were
Love
you
it.
in Petra?
Yes, I was in Petra twice actually.
It's
It's amazing.
amazing,
It's
isn't it
amazing.
amazing?
It is.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It's some of the oldest human civilizations and all there. Although they tell one propaganda story there in Petra. So if you look up at the treasury, when you walk down where they filmed Indiana Jones, there's a bunch of holes all over the top of the Petra and the treasury area. And what they fail to tell you is that the Jordanian army came in there and started shooting at all the Bedouin tribes in the 80s with 50 caliber machine guns to get them out of there because they were turning it into a World UNESCO site. But they had, and all the Bedouin tribes in Jordan, they lived there for thousands of years. I mean, even until the 80s, until they turned it into a World UNESCO heritage site. But it's kind of funny that you mentioned that they said Amman was the most sophisticated, beautiful city in the world compared to Damascus. And I will tell you, Amman is not that. Amman has a lot of issues. And if they were saying that it was the most sophisticated city then, I can't imagine what Damascus was actually like.
That's exactly my point. That's my point, that Damascus was so much worse.
Oh, I can't imagine
Yeah,
what it was like then if they were saying Amman's like,
yeah.
going to, Shanghai or
And
something.
and
Or,
and then came the Civil War, and
yep.
then came all these horrors. And can you imagine what it's like today?
It's
Outside of
actually a disaster.
America, Adam, outside of America, what's been your favorite spot?
Outside of America, man, that's interesting. So actually, one of my favorite. I spent a lot of time in England too, doing my master's degree up there. I was at Oxford and stuff, and it's just such a
Mm.
unique area. I spent a lot of time in White Tower, which is that's where they did all the executions and stuff back in the medieval days. I'm a kind of a history nerd, but actually, one of the most fascinating places I've been is actually the Netherlands. I actually toured the Anne Frank house out there, for the Nazi occupation, and just the way they set up that city is so unique. Like you don't need to drive anywhere; you can walk and go in and out of everywhere.
Bicycle, my
Yeah,
bicycle.
bicycle for everywhere. But I would say Petra Jordan, in terms of like just sheer awe, was Petra for sure, because you're sitting there going like, humans made this by hand,
Yeah.
tens of thousands of years ago, and it's still here. It's where
No,
civilization
it's
started.
all carved into rock.
Carm, you don't have to lean
Yeah.
over. Every time my mother's speaking, if you're listening, she moves her head 40 feet forward and she's out of frame. And Adam, one of the things I do, I've got an Instagram handle at Surviving the Survivor. We got a pretty big following. Every time Carm FaceTimes me, she
It's great. I love
literally
it.
has her phone
No,
on
I
a
have my
on a
phone on a. I have a
strap
belt on
upside
a
down.
strap.
So she FaceTimes me upside down, and I'm always looking at like ceilings. So I will just like screenshot that and put that up on Instagram. So if anyone wants screenshots of upside down ceilings, follow me on Instagram. Surviving the
I
Survivor.
actually just followed you on Instagram. So Dark Saber Productions follows you, and then Adam Druda is going to follow you now too.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, but it's Nepal was actually fascinating as well when I went out there, seeing the Himalayan mountains and Mount Everest. I was doing some NGO work out there, building houses from the earthquake, and actually when I was out there, this got super scary. So what people don't understand in America, there is no social services like literally outside the United States, even Mexico and England. Like you call 911, good luck, if it even exists. But when I was in Nepal watching the Himalayan mountains, we flew out to the western side in this really rickety aircraft, which a week before that same type of aircraft crashed on the runway and killed everybody. So that was I'm like, well, do I have a parachute on this thing? Like, where's the door in case I have to get out? But we flew out to the western side of the country near the Tiger Preserve, which is one of the few areas in the world where they still have wild tigers. And actually, the Nepalese army actively trains out there because they're hunting poachers out there with the Gurkhas, which is like their special forces dudes. They're crazy. They go in the jungle and if you're in that park after 6 p.m. and you're a human, you're getting shot because they're trying to protect all those natural tigers that still exist on the India Nepali border there. But one of them was, but the architecture and how old everything is out there, and they still do open air cremation 24 hours a day out there because there's so many people out there that die constantly from all the, the disease and the poisoned water and stuff. And if you've been to a third world country, you know what I'm talking about. But like, we're going on the Ganges River in Nepal, and we're sitting there watching them burn 20 bodies right there on the river, and they just take a broom and they sweep all the body parts right into the river, and then right down the river they're just washing their clothes and getting their food. It's crazy out there. And so I mean, like I said, I've seen some beautiful areas, and it all looks great on Instagram, it all looks great on Google, but when you're actually in those countries, it gives you a much different perspective on the reality of human suffering. So
I can't get over how smart Adam is and like well put together. Like this kid's like,
my parents made me read a lot when I was a kid. So.
Is that what it is? Yeah.
I did.
I mean, you've got.
As a kid. I still read
Have you ever
now.
taken an IQ test? Like,
No,
what's your
I
IQ
haven't.
at?
No,
you
'cause
haven't.
Probably with all the political people I fight on a daily basis, they'll just call me stupid anyway. Like I had to fight Lauren Boebert yesterday. That was interesting.
Really? How did that go?
In person.
Really?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, to switch gears a little bit, is that I have spent more time fighting corrupt Republicans than I've ever fought Democrats on anything. Actually, Democrats are pretty reasonable because I know where they stand on every issue. We're not.
Is Boebert? Well, I'm sorry. Is Boebert in Colorado?
She is.
I should know that.
Yeah. She's actually in the district above me. Mine represent when I came back from Syria and Jordan. I got redistricted and gerrymandered when I was overseas. So now she's no longer my representative. It's somebody else named Gabe Evans. He's the new guy. But they were doing a reorganization meeting for my county yesterday, and I was trying to run for a position in there, but they can't stand me because I'm a very America first, putting America first in everything, and actually doing things the right way. Like we call it the new conservative movement. Like we don't curtail to the Ronald Reagan people, but the Ronald Reagan people still control everything in this country. Like they think he's going to come back from the dead, like some kind of necromancy kind of thing. It's weird. And I'm the vice chairman, the national vice chairman of the America First Veterans Association, which we encourage young combat veterans out of the global war on terror to run for office. We want younger guys to actually take over this country. We don't want the people who have sent us to war for 20 years in control of everything. And Lauren Boebert's interesting because in the past she's always been this more outspoken person, kind of riding the line on stuff. But recently, she's kind of been bought into the establishment, which is super unfortunate because you see the corruption. And I'm sure you saw this your time in D.C., where it comes down to brass tacks is I need money to keep my job, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get that money. And that's actually people we don't support, and no matter what side of the aisle you sit on. We don't want the corrupt people in office anymore. We don't want people that are just in it for money. And you kind of saw my intro, like I am the sponsor of the Dorito Act, which is we are holding federal service academies accountable for rape, sexual assault, retaliation, which is my back end story, which would be great for your podcast story if you want to talk about crime and corruption in the military.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, that's another discussion. But so I pretty much have proposed to her for the last 2 years, hey, I want you to be a sponsor for my bill, as somebody who represents constituents, and this is a bipartisan issue. And she absolutely refuses to sign on to it because I am a contested person in D.C. and she doesn't want to do the right thing by her constituents, and it's super unfortunate. But like I said, I will work my best with this organization to remove them from office if I have to, and that's Republicans, right? If they're doing the wrong thing, you need to leave.
I mean, look, there's literally a guy that tracks Nancy Pelosi's husband's stock trades. I mean, it's the most corrupt system, and that's. I mean,
I put $100
how's
a
Nancy
month into that.
Do you?
Fund.
That's
it's hilarious because that stock is as a joke. I think I have a couple $1,000s in it, but it's like, I wish I put my entire 401k into this thing because Nancy Pelosi is the most amazing stock trader in the United States.
And
like
suddenly. AOC, who's a bartender from the Bronx, is like a multimillionaire suddenly. Like look at Barack Obama. I mean, and these are
wild because what I tell people is that if we want to prevent another Holocaust, we actually want to prevent real wars. Like we want to end the war in Ukraine, we want to end the war in Israel and Gaza. And for the guys who actually have to put boots on the ground to deal with that stuff, we're done with it. We are vanquished. We are exhausted. But these people who have been in charge for 20, 30 years keep wanting to do this stuff because they're benefiting from the military-industrial complex. They're benefiting from corrupt political donations. And now we're old enough. We're in our 30s, 40s now. And we're just like, you know what? Why don't we just do this? But the problem with most Americans is that they have to take care of their kids. They have to go do a job, and they don't have time to go to their local mayoral meetings, their local county commissioner meetings. Yeah. So the people who are in charge of your local government, who actually are way more influenced than the national people, are the best of the worst. They are just these retired people with nothing else better to do who own a couple Airbnbs, and they just do whatever it takes for money. And now I start bringing these younger guys and gals to these meetings, and I tell them how to wear a suit. I tell them how to ask questions, and now they're like, who are these younger people trying to overthrow their government? I'm like, us. and the worst part is you trained us in the military for years to do this in other countries. And now we're doing it here, and you're getting mad at us. And we're trying to do this on a national scale too, where I know Jason Lawford, and he's actually the national chairman, and he's actually based in New York, and we fly out and meet up all the time. But like, we're being effective, and it's really starting to rattle the cages of these people, because if we want to prevent, like the basis of what you do, crime and all these other things, and your mom with the Holocaust and actually having these real world experiences. Well, do we want to keep having these podcasts and keep telling these stories on repeat every 20 years because it keeps happening, or do we want to do something to change the system? And now we're just trying to encourage everyday Americans to actually take accountability, because my biggest testament to this is you have a choice, and I'm sure Karmela knows exactly what I'm talking about. You could be a resident, or you can be a citizen. And a resident just sits around, they eat, they go to the bathroom, they go to work, they take care of their kids, and they ignore everything outside of their mailbox, right? Or you can be a citizen, and you can actually participate in your constitutional republic. You can show up to these really boring meetings where old people just fight all day, and you can actually ask questions and demand, why aren't my taxes being lowered? Or why are you trying to raise my taxes? Or, why are the price of eggs so high? And actually hold these people accountable. You elected them, so hold them accountable. And if you don't like what they're doing, we teach them how to run for office, precinct committee person, state executive committee, and people don't know what these things are, is because these people who've been in these political circles for decades keep these secrets. They don't tell people how to be involved in their government, and we're trying to tell people that they can run for Senate. You can run for Congress. Anyone can run for these things. We just have to teach them how to do it. And it's really starting to rattle people's cages that we're exposing these so-called secrets about how to actually be an American citizen and actually participate in your democracy.
Do you have political aspirations? Is there an office that you'd like?
I currently don't, but the way this is going, it's kind of like, you go to that Bible verse by Isaiah, if not me, then who? It's like I've gotten to the point where I kind of coined myself as a political consultant, on my LLC on the backside, outside of my real job at the refinery and in the Army, where I coach people on how to engage in these meetings and how to do these things. But I sit there and just go, well, are you gonna freaking do this? Or are you gonna run for office, or are you gonna make me do it? You know what I mean? And and I think you'll agree, I hate these people. I hate all politicians. I hate both sides of the aisle. I think they are the worst. I just want to hang out, drink a whiskey, hang out with my chickens and my dog and my fiance, right? And it's like, nope, nope. I have to put on a tie, put on a monkey suit, show up to the county commissioner meeting and tell them to stop raising my taxes because like I go into the meeting room and no one's there. You know what I
Mm.
mean? So maybe in the future, if I always tell people I would never run for office unless I was asked to by my neighbors because I want to do this as an act of service. I don't want to do it for myself. And the problem with so many politicians today is they only do it for themselves. They only do it to enrich themselves, to gain the stocks system, like we just talked about, and it hurts the American people because, you know, when it comes to actual social service, Medicare, Medicaid, or any of these reforms in our country, you know, American citizens need to take responsibility and participate. And if they don't become citizens and they just want to stay residents, then you have no right to complain on the internet if you're not actually trying to force that change. And it's not hard. Like I said, literally, I got Lauren Boebert to get angry at me yesterday. And in real life, she's just a normal mom doing mom stuff. They just make her look like this aggrandized figure on CNN. And she's not. She's just all these people are just normal people when it comes down to it. And even you could run for office, Joel. So could your mom. Yeah, you know, you could all do these things. And just Americans are, in my opinion, most of them are just lazy. And they think that everything is handed to them. And don't take your country for granted. If you take your country for granted, your country's going to take advantage of you. And we've seen that over the last 20 years. You know?
Yeah, Carm, if you run for president, you'll actually bring down the average age of
I
the
can't.
presidency.
I was born
This
in
is so
Europe.
true.
I can be anything other than president.
You could just
But
put
what
as
do you
VP.
think? Just like a side question,
You don't have to
what do you
lean
think?
in.
What do you think of Dodge?
I think it's
Doge.
great. I
Doge.
think Doge is great because I will tell you, as a person who has served in
Dodgeball.
as a person who has served in the military for over 15 years now, the amount of corruption and wasted money, taxpayer dollars that I have seen just in the military alone is billions, if not trillions of dollars. And that's just one entity. So the fact that they're exposing the wasted money, your wasted tax dollars, and one thing I really support was no taxing on Social Security moving forward. If I've already paid taxes and I paid into the system, I'm owed that money back, right? But if we can eliminate the corruption in a lot of these systems, there'll be money for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid moving forward. But you know, the fact that we're sending, you know, whatever, $20 million to Uganda for transgender operas, like what are we doing? You know, and what people don't understand on this front too, a lot of it is CIA operations that we can't talk about. Like they give them these cover names that sound ridiculous because some guy in an office in the NSA thought it was funny. When really it's probably funding some militia group in Uganda. It's not really funding a transgender opera in reality, but we need to take care of America. We need to take care of Americans. We need to take care of people like you, Carmela, who survived the war and want to tell these stories, right? But we can't. We can cut our spending in half and still have way too much. America is blessed with having so much excess that Americans don't realize it, right? And I think that making our government more efficient, not wasting our tax dollars moving forward, is that we can actually reform our social welfare programs and actually help more Americans and rebuild our roads and our bridges. I mean, you've seen, I mean, how much is the crumbling infrastructure in New York City can you name alone? You know, I mean, my grandmother, her house is a mile away from the George Washington Bridge, which was built in the 1920s. And I sit there and go, I think this thing needs more than just new paint. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean?
God forbid
So
that thing falls, but it's,
I think everyone, no matter what political aisle you sit on, we can all agree that we can cut the waste, fraud, and abuse in our country and use that money to help Americans in their everyday lives. So
I know nothing about anything, but I mean, it's interesting. I mean, he's literally talking about just getting rid of the Department of Education. I mean, they're cutting at the FBI. I mean, everywhere. Do you think there's going to be some sort of ripple effect or repercussion economically speaking? Like, I mean, so I feel like there's going to be hundreds of thousands of unemployed people all of a sudden.
Well, here's the thing. I've worked with a lot of federal workers over the years, and most of them should be fired. They do nothing, and they literally sit in an office and do nothing. But let's use New Jersey as an example. New Jersey, in my personal opinion, the reason why I probably am so well educated is because they had the best public school system in the country when it comes to raising your kids. Why can't we take that model and use it across the country? Right. So this kind of comes to a states' rights argument. And I think that and if you look at how dumb people are in this country today, how stupid these kids are, it's bad. You know, I used to talk to my ex-wife's like kids and they're just stuck on their iPads all day and they can't do math. Like, what are we doing? You know, but I go to Nepal and I have this kid who's a third world country who could do calculus and he's 5. I'm
Sounds
not even
right, yeah.
exaggerating when I say that.
Yeah.
So it's, do we need to get rid of the Department of Education per se in its current form? Yes, but that doesn't mean it can't be revamped, because it's just wasted millions and billions of dollars and it hasn't done any good. Our country's gotten less intelligent over the last 20 years. Just from what I'm actually a substitute teacher in my other spare time that I don't have, and yeah, it's what I do for fun, because I actually want to have kids and I love kids, which is a little bit opposite of you.
No.
From what you
I'll say
described.
this though. Now that I
No,
have
he's
kids, now
a
that I have
no,
kids,
no,
I
no.
love it.
You give.
Now,
He's a fabulous father.
by the
Yeah.
way, having kids is the best thing you can do. I just never wanted them, but now I
It
have
is,
'em.
and that's what I encourage all Americans to do: is go get married, go have kids. This country cannot survive in its culture without you having kids to replace you, right? So, Carmela, you're good. You had a son, and he's had kids, so he's good to keep his bloodline going.
I
But
also have a daughter, thank God. I have a
that's great.
daughter.
And that's amazing. And that's what
Yeah.
this country is about. Even in the 1950s, which, people say was misogynist, but like, the government encouraged in a post-Cold War environment is to have kids, have traditional family roles and everything else moving forward, because that's what's going to keep the country moving forward is those
But I
traditional
have to
families.
tell you something, Adam, that
Sure.
what you are doing, you are going to the grassroots, to
Hmm.
the bottom level, and you are trying to build it up from there.
You have
And
to.
and that's how my understanding is you have to do that there, because that's where the mayor comes in, and then
Yep.
next year he runs for a state representative, and then the next election cycle he runs for the Senate and the Congress, and
100%.
this is where it starts.
I agree, and the problem is most Americans think they can't participate in their government. They think it's like something they can never touch, and that's not true. You just have to understand the process. But the problem is the Democrats and the Republicans on both sides, they keep the processes like semi-secret, because they like to keep their control and their power. And we're publishing this information willingly. We're telling them how to
Mm,
do it. We're telling them how to participate. And,
mm.
and if we, like I said, the Department of Education definitely needs to be reformed. And I think if we stop all the wasteful spending and we rebuild it, and you give states the individuality to be able to do these things outside of what the Constitution says they can do, it would be great. Like, I would love to see the New Jersey model of public education in Colorado. You know what I
It's
mean? Or
interesting you say that because at the beginning of the show I was talking about like just these freaks of nature when it comes to intelligence from my hometown.
Mhm.
And my public school, Highland Park High School, number one, I mean, to this day, I have a lot of Jersey pride. People love to make fun of Jersey, but it's true. Like our public school, and it was starting to like erode a little bit even when I was there, but it's pretty much back on track. But it was probably one of the best educations you could have gotten.
Yeah,
Like
like
in my
school's hard,
yeah.
and I had to like learn stuff and read and actually take notes and take tests that I was actually, so when I went to the Air Force Academy,
Yeah.
academics were still really tough there, like unnecessarily tough. Like there's, figure out how to launch a rocket to the moon. I'm like, okay, let me calculate the fuel and the apogees for this. Like, whatever. Am I ever going to do that? No, but I had to do it anyway. But I am very thankful because I ended up becoming an engineer in the oil field. And then the best part about growing up as a blue collar poor kid, because I grew up in a very poor family, was that my dad and my grandfather, before he passed away, they taught me how to use tools. They taught me how to change oil. They taught me how to change tires. And these are skills that kids today are losing. And I'm so glad I grew up in the environment that I did. It was hard. It wasn't easy. I have had a job since I was 12.
Mhm.
And I don't see that in today's America. I see kids being handed everything, stuck with an iPad in their face, and they don't know how to tie their shoes because everything's
Mhm.
available on Amazon and YouTube. And why would I need to get outside and go play and get hurt? You know how many times I got hurt as a kid? I used to light stuff on fire. I used to play with knives. I used to get calls from my neighbors all the time. And that's the way kids should grow up. Go out, get hurt, make dumb decisions, make mistakes. Because if you don't, when the Chinese invade America, you're going to be in a hard position to learn how to survive. You
Yeah.
really
By the
are.
way, I'm gonna book your guest now. I've got another guy, a Jersey guy, Rob D'Amico, who lives in Florida. He's a guest on my program a lot.
Mhm.
He was part of the FBI's. He was in the military for many years, but then he became part of the very elite FBI's HRT team, which is the
Ooh,
hostage rescue team.
you
And
got to
he
send these
was,
guys my way. I'm
yeah.
excited to talk to these
Well,
people.
he was in Somalia saving these 4 American citizens who ended up being killed by Somali pirates. But
Oh, I
he
definitely got to
was
talk to
on
him.
yeah, he was on this team that went on board and basically took care of business and brought back the main Somali pirate to be
Yeah. Can I
He's
ask you,
now
Adam,
serving 140 years.
how did you hear about our podcast?
So I guess your PR person reached out to me,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then we just booked the show. I get a couple emails like that, and I love this because this is one of the most fascinating conversations I've had in a long time. That I didn't have to talk about politics the entire time or like taking down the government. Well, maybe a little bit, but I appreciate this because I just meet random people this way, and this has been such a fascinating conversation, and we're building friendships and relationships about this. And this is great. Like, I love the fact that we've been able to tell your story and talk about your book and your podcast. And so we've talked about your book and your mom's story a little bit. So why don't you guys dive into your podcast a little bit and Surviving the Survivor and what you're doing there and what awareness you're bringing to the American public with that?
Well, first, when we started, we met once a week in a
Carm, why don't you
boarding.
go? Carm, why don't you go first?
I just chose to. I think it's age before beauty.
It is. Go ahead.
So, in the beginning we had once a week, and I think Joel's fantasy was. I always lower my expectations, but Joel's fantasy was that it will really take off, and it will shoot up to the sky. And we did fantastic, interesting interview that I just look forward to every Wednesday afternoon with very important people. Some of them died now, and some of them we got in a nick of time, and so forth. And our numbers weren't moving much. And so one day, by total serendipity and accident, we stumbled upon a case called the Denmark Hell case, which here in Florida, it's very local, and people were getting very involved with it. And sadly, it was a Jewish family that hired a hitman to kill their ex-Jewish son-in-law, and they hired two local. One was a Latin king, and the other one was, I think, a Cuban,
Just a
right?
thug American. Yeah. Long story short, this guy was Dan Markel was born in Montreal, raised in Toronto, went to Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law School, and then he's sitting in his driveway after dropping his kids off at daycare in 2014 in the summer, and he's shot in the head twice, and he ends up obviously dying.
This was exactly almost 11 years, 10 years ago. And anyway, the case was like beginning to get a lot of traction, and we were making jokes. The people who hired the
Hitman.
assassin, the hitman, were a mother and son. And so we were joking that Joel and I are like that mother and son minus the murder, and
And
we
that mother, by the way, who's 75, is going on trial in
just
June.
now,
The son was
because
already
there was
convicted.
like you would have immediately reacted. There was some kind of a corruption, and the previous attorney general didn't feel there was enough material to bring in the family, and only 10 years later was justice served. And so we got in on this story, and since then our numbers skyrocketed, and I became semi-retired. I don't show up every time, but I try to look at the psychosocial aspect of the whole situation. And then we talk a lot about victims also, the victims of
Yeah.
crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And we get involved with tangential things. The other day I thought Joel would be knocked off because he went very strongly against the the governor of Pennsylvania in one case, and I
Yeah,
thought he was playing with a little.
it's a crazy story. You have
Yeah.
time? You have
So
time
so
for
we
yeah,
take so we take he takes
Adam? You have time for
on
like a
cases.
30-second crazy story about corruption and
I got all the time
politicians?
in the world for you guys.
All
This
right.
is great. You guys could talk
Yeah,
for 6 hours for all I care.
yeah. I'm actually due to get a haircut in about 15, 20 minutes, but I'll let Carm keep going as long as she wants. She's
Darling,
actually,
I'm old. I'm
no,
worn
you're
by
not old.
life.
Carm, you got nothing to do today. All right, I'll tell you
That's
this
not
story.
true.
I'll tell you this story. By the way, Carm lives in like your stereotypical Miami Beach condo and all the. It's like they're all. When we had the first podcast before we pivoted to true crime, I would do a segment called "This Week in Dead and Dying" because old Jews and I think Italians too, Adam, like to talk about ailments and who's sick, who's got prostate cancer, who's got this. So we used to do "This Week in Dead and Dying" on the show, but that no longer exists. But Carm's condo
It became
still
too
goes on.
real, Adam. It became too
All right,
real.
let me tell you this
So-
story super quick. So there's a woman named Ellen Greenberg, 27 years old. She's living in a suburb of Philadelphia, and she ends up dead on a night where there's a nor'easter. On her way home, she stops to get, this is obviously a true story. She stops to get gas, fills up her car, and is in the process of making a fruit salad, which is important because she's got a fiance who she's living with. And she is stabbed 20 times, 10 to the front of her body and 10 to the back. And I mean, really far back. And she's got a giant gash on her head. Well, the boyfriend is a guy named Sam Goldberg. Her name is Ellen Greenberg. By the way, we don't just cover Jewish crime. It just happens that these are to be the two really fascinating. We're not
podcast.
yeah. But so Ellen ends up dead. Police come and investigate in 5 seconds, and they rule it a homicide, right? Her fiance is a guy named Sam Goldberg. You got to follow this a little bit. So Sam Goldberg's uncle, it was
all this is allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah, whatever. Allegedly, yeah. So Sam Goldberg's uncle is a guy named James Schwartzman. James Schwartzman still is a powerful criminal defense attorney and was a judge as well. James Schwartzman's kid went to school with Josh Shapiro. So their children are friends.
Interesting.
Schwartzman has funded most of his campaigns back to even before state senator. So now this guy, James Schwartzman's son, I'm not saying that Shapiro was complicit at all, but at the time he was attorney general of Pennsylvania and completely turned a blind eye to this, as did the DA in Philadelphia. What happened was it was ruled a homicide. Within 12 hours, they let this guy, James Schwartzman, the first call Sam Goldberg makes is to his uncle and cousin. So he's got a cousin, Camion Schwartzman, whose dad is James Schwartzman, the powerful guy. They show up at the condo where this woman is dead, and they remove laptops, cell phones, and aren't asked to bring it back for two days, because 48 hours. And also are allowed to bring in a company that is literally called Crime Scene Cleanup, and have the entire place cleaned top to bottom. And then suddenly the case goes from homicide to undetermined. And after a closed door meeting between the medical examiner, police, and politicians in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, after a closed door meeting, 3 months later, they reversed the ruling, and it is now ruled as suicide.
Of course it is.
And she has something like 11 official other bruises on her body, indicative of domestic violence. She was living with a guy, her fiance. His story is completely there's just everything he says is an inconsistent statement. Anyway, Josh Shapiro was just pressed on this literally.
Well, this happened how long ago?
This happened in 2011. The case to this day has never been investigated, but the Greenbergs have had to spend $800,000 of their own money. But listen to this. So
there was a breakthrough now.
Thanks, Carm. You're like the Fox News alert, except you're verbally doing it. So anyway, long story short, they finally got to the point, the Greenbergs, Sandy and Josh, the parents, this was their only child. They finally get to the point where they're able to sue, not the city of Philadelphia, but the employee. So they sue the original medical examiner, the medical examiner's boss, and a detective who worked the case, and on the eve of what would have been a jury trial, I actually went up to Philadelphia for this. Lo and behold, the city settles. They decide that they're going to pay back the Greenbergs for the amount of money they spent, like $800,000 of their own money. But the original medical examiner, a guy named Dr. Marlon Osborne, who is the medical examiner for the Parkland school shooting, he's in South Florida. On the eve of this trial, he comes out and says, my original ruling about a suicide, it wasn't a suicide. So now this case is like whatever. And so after that, after Marlon Osborne says it wasn't a suicide, Josh Shapiro is asked about this and gives like a 20-minute answer just with one, I won't call it a lie, one falsehood after the other, and says that the evidence still points to suicide when the medical examiner 2 days before that said it's not a suicide. It drives me crazy, man. It drives. And look, Shapiro's a Jewish guy. I want Shapiro to be, I would love a Jewish president. I don't want Shapiro to be the president. I just cannot stand the slime. And he, if you watch him, literally like mimics and talks with the same cadence as Barack Obama. It's like these guys practice in the. It's like they practice in the mirror.
Shapiro Obama.
Yeah, and it drives me insane, man. It drives me crazy. Anyway,
so you see, we don't have dull lives.
No, not at all. You guys live a very exciting life, probably more exciting than mine half the time talking to these people. But I know you got to get a haircut and everything else. And you want to plug your book and your podcast again, so everyone else can know where to find you guys and connect with you.
100%. So Karma's holding up the book, but what she doesn't realize is probably most people are listening. So the book and the podcast, I keep it easy for people. Both are called Surviving the Survivor. I'm always trying to survive Karm's wrath, hence the name. The podcast is literally a live true crime show every day on YouTube and anywhere you listen to podcasts. And we truly do have the best guests. That's our tagline, best guests
And
in
it's
true crime.
listed what time. Sometimes it's in the evening, sometimes in the afternoon, because it's very interesting, Adam. People watch us from the entire globe. From all the different countries. You wouldn't believe. We didn't even know where they were. We had to look up where these countries
Just
were.
watch out if they come from Angola. There's probably Chinese spies.
So we have the podcast. It's on YouTube. We actually just launched. I had this idea because we have all these guests that come on. Some of the ones that I was telling you about, and they came to me and said, "Hey, I'm now a private investigator. I don't have time. I don't know how to start a podcast." So we started a second channel with our best guests hosting shows in whatever expertise they have. And I kind of modeled it after sports talk radio. So that's STS True Crime Talk. And then the book is Surviving the Survivor. And honestly, I really do think it will change your perspective on how you see life, because my mom's been through a lot. Not only did she go through the war, she lost a child, she lost her husband of more than 60 years during the writing of this book. And you can learn, like Adam has from his grandmother, who has since passed, sadly. You can learn from these old people like my mother and me now that I'm getting old. And by the way, I tell Carm, Adam, I'm like, I don't want to die young. She's like, it's too late. You can't die young. Which bothers me. By the way,
you cannot die young anymore.
By the way, the book is anywhere Amazon, anywhere you have booksellers. The book is sold, published by Post Hill Press. Shout out to them. But Adam, let me tell you something. In a couple years, it's going to happen slowly and then super quick. The first gray is going to come in. That stash is not going to be.
Oh my God!
Around.
What a nasty way to end the story.
Look at that. He doesn't have a wrinkle on that face, man. Crows. I'm in full middle age. Like if you all
Stop
of a sudden
whining. I never heard you whine about
I'm
this
going
before.
to a longevity thing here. There's this lunatic. Have you heard of Brian Johnson? He's an absolute lunatic. There's a documentary on Netflix called Don't Die. He's like one of these
Joe Rogan interviewed him. He talked about the longevity science and stuff.
He sold a tech company, made like $500 million, and now literally every day he's getting plasma infusions. He takes 430 supplements a day. Anyway, he's coming to speak in Miami, and I'm I'm going to see him. I'm trying to figure out how
You
to
are
get time.
crazy. You are
By the way,
crazy. You
I've
see,
heard that because it's kind of come out now that Bezos, I think Musk, and one other person, they've literally quietly have dropped billions of dollars to try to live forever, and I love it because they're not going to be able to, and money can't buy it. And I
God
hope,
will kill you.
yeah,
God will take
God
you
will
from this
kill.
earth at one point.
Yeah, well, they think that they're going to buy their way out of it. So that is the great equalizer. One last thing I want to leave you with. I'm starting work on the second book called Surviving the Psychiatrist about my dad. My dad was a very interesting character.
Mhm.
And my dad was born into the Great Depression, 1933 in the Bronx. He was born in Brooklyn, raised in the Bronx. He was terrified about money. I've sadly inherited that now in middle age. I don't want to end up in a soup kitchen with my kids, which I'm worried about, but that's a different story. But my dad used to say, Joel, I was always worried about money, and now I'm worried about time. And he said that's the most precious commodity. So I will leave on a positive yet sad and morbid note.
No, that's great. I really appreciate this interview from both of you. So make sure you guys go check out Surviving the Survivor on Instagram. Go buy the book on anywhere you can buy books. And hang on here for a second when we end. When I play the outro, I want to make sure this all records and we can get some side chats going because I definitely want to connect with your guys as well. And this has been Adam Dorito on the Tuxes Tomahawks podcast with Karmela and Joel Waldman. And thank you guys so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you. Best cold
thank
open
you
in
for
all
having
podcasting.
us.
Best open in podcasting.